Hello and welcome. You're watching WION World is One and our continued coverage of what's happening in the United States, where the Prime Minister is at the moment. Well, the bilateral is taking place between the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the U.S. President Donald Trump. It has begun in New York on the sidelines of the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly. And shortly we will, of course, be getting you all the live visuals from there as well. And what we know at this point, of course, is that the opening statements have been made by the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who has said that I am thankful to Donald Trump that he came to Houston. He is my friend, but he's also the friend of India. So, of course, some of those statements being made already by the Prime Minister. He also said that we haven't completed 3 months in this year, but have met Donald Trump 3 times already. The meeting comes 2 days after both the leaders addressed. In fact, these are the visuals, the first shots of that bilateral meeting that is underway at the moment, a day after the Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan also met with Donald Trump, and there were some intense moments there. Of course, a lot of media frenzy over that meeting as well. And remember, on the sidelines of this UNGA, there are several occasions on which the Indian Prime Minister and the Pakistani Prime Minister will be coming face to face as well. Difficult position for Donald Trump. Of course, the focus of this meeting between the Indian Prime Minister and the American President will be trade, but also the discussion on, of course, Pakistan and other difficult issues will also come up. Yesterday, the Pakistani Prime Minister continued to rake up the issue of Kashmir. Donald Trump, of course, snubbed him on several occasions, saying that mediation between India and Pakistan was only possible if both sides wanted it. The meeting, of course, as I pointed out, comes 2 days after both leaders addressed a mega event in Houston called the Howdy Modi event as well. And trade, security and Pakistan-sponsored terrorism are likely to be the central focus of this discussion. An important meeting, the third in just 3 months.
But during this period of time, I've had the occasion to President Trump 3 times now, and we've had very detailed and fruitful discussions on many issues. In the world, between the oldest and the largest democracy, this kind of nearness, these relationship of ease and this continuous engagement, I think countries coming together which believe in democratic values, I think that's a very good sign for the world. For India and the United States, not only are we very close friends, but this is a friendship that is based on values, and this will continue to strengthen in the times to come. As far as trade is concerned, I'm very happy that day before yesterday in Houston, in my presence, there was an agreement signed by the Indian company Petronet for an amount of $2.5 billion, which is the amount of investment that the Indian company is going to do in the energy sector. And this will mean that in the years to come, in the decades to come, this will result in trade of an amount of $60 billion and create 50,000 jobs, which I think is a very big initiative taken by India. President Trump is definitely my friend, but he is also a friend of India. And relations between India and the United States are proceeding at a very good and fast pace. Once again, let me thank President Trump.
Mr. President, you've mentioned President Trump. You've mentioned trade. And Prime Minister Modi had during the Houston event said that you know the art of the deal. Can we expect something on a trade deal in talks today, or what the U.S. and India can do together to boost trade ties going forward?
Well, I think very soon. We're doing very well, and Bob Lighthizer, who's right here, was negotiating with India, and they're very capable representatives. And I think very soon we'll have a trade deal. We'll have the larger deal down the road a little bit, but we will have a trade deal very soon.
Mr. Trump,
in Houston, you said that you've been talking about, clamping down on terrorism from across the globe. Pakistan has been the global epicenter of terrorism, sir. You spoke about it in Houston. How do you make sure that you clamp down on terrorism from Pakistan? Because that is posing threat to democracies like the U.S. and India. Even the business interests suffer because of continuing terrorism.
Well, I had a very good meeting with Prime Minister Khan. It was a long meeting, and we discussed a lot. And I think he'd like to see something happen that would be very fruitful, very peaceful. And I think that will happen ultimately. I really believe that these two great gentlemen will get together and work something. I also, you mentioned Pakistan, but Iran would have to be at the top of the list, because if you look at terrorist states, that's been the number one for a long time. But I really believe that Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Khan, they get along, they will get along when they get to know each other, and I think a lot of good things will come from that meeting.
President, this is the most spectacular.
Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan admitted that 40,000 of terrorists are still in Pakistan. And yesterday at a think tank event, he again admitted that Pakistan Army and ISI trained Al-Qaeda. Separately, there are reports that thousands of terrorists are ready to infiltrate into India. In this backdrop, what do you would like to give message to Pakistan?
Well, I mean, the message is not for me to give, it's for Prime Minister Modi to give, and I think he gave that loud and clear on the other day when we were together. He gave a pretty loud message. And I'm sure he'll be able to handle that situation. Yes,
President Trump, this is the spectacular show you had with Prime Minister Modi in Houston. What is the significance of this event for India-U.S. relations and your personal chemistry with Prime Minister
Modi? Well, my personal chemistry is as good as it can get. I have great respect, I have great admiration, and I really like him. That's another thing. And he's a great gentleman and a great leader. And I remember India before, now not intimately, but I remember India before, and it was very torn. There was a lot of dissension, a lot of fighting, and he brought it all together. Like a father would bring it together. And maybe he's the father of India. We'll call him the father of India. I think that's not so bad. But he brought things together, and you don't hear that anymore. So I think he's done a fantastic job. And I think that what the event showed is how much I like the country of India and how much I like your Prime Minister. There was tremendous spirit in that room too, and they love this gentleman to my right. They really do. Those people went crazy. That was like Elvis. That was like an American. He's like an American version of Elvis. It was like we brought in the middle of an all-American deal. Elvis Presley came back. He was. That was quite something. They love your Prime Minister. It's a great thing.
Mr. President,
Mr. President, in Houston, you said that you stand with India in fight against Islamic radical terrorism. How do you see the statement coming from the Pakistani Prime Minister admitting that the Pakistani state, the ISI, trained Al-Qaeda? How do you see and how do you deal?
I haven't heard that, and I know this, that your Prime Minister will take care of it.
Sir, is there a roadmap to deal with radical Islamic terror, sir?
It would be great if they could work out something on Kashmir. We all want to see that, I'm sure.
But isn't terror a bigger issue, sir? Pakistan state-sponsored terror. Is there a roadmap to deal with Pakistan state-sponsored terror?
Reporters. I wish I had reporters like this. We're doing better than anybody I've ever heard. Where do you find these reporters? This is a great thing. No, look, you have a great Prime Minister. He'll solve the problem. I have no doubt about it. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, so those are the statements coming from Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the U.S. President Donald Trump. Well, some very flattering comments there from the U.S. President Donald Trump, who said that the Prime Minister Narendra Modi is like the father of India. There was a lot of fighting earlier on in India. He didn't know much about India, Donald Trump said, but Prime Minister Modi has been able to bring India together. He is like a father, and also said that this gentleman here, he is like Elvis. He also, of course, talked about the fact that both sides will be reaching a trade deal very soon. He said that the meeting between him and Prime Minister Modi was long, and when asked about Kashmir, he said that these two are great gentlemen, of course referring here to Imran Khan and Prime Minister Modi, saying that I'm sure they're going to get together and do something about it. Well, let's just listen in once again.
This period of time, I've had the occasion to meet President Trump 3 times now, and we've had very detailed and fruitful discussions on many issues. In the world, between the oldest and the largest democracy, this kind of nearness, these relationship of ease, and this continuous engagement, I think countries coming together which believe in democratic values, I think that's a very good sign for the world. For India and the United States, not only are we very close friends, but this is a friendship that is based on values, and this will continue to strengthen in the times to come. As far as trade is concerned, I'm very happy that day before yesterday in Houston, in my presence, there was an agreement signed by the Indian company Petronet for an amount of $2.5 billion, which is the amount of investment that the Indian company is going to do in the energy sector. And this will mean that in the years to come, in the decades to come, this will result in trade of an amount of $60 billion and create 50,000 jobs, which I think is a very big initiative taken by India. President Trump is definitely my friend, but he is also a friend of India. And relations between India and the United States are proceeding at a very good and fast pace. Once again, let me thank President Trump.
Mr. President, you've mentioned President Trump. You've mentioned trade, and Prime Minister Modi had during the Houston event said that you know the art of the deal. Can we expect something on a trade deal in talks today, or what the U.S. and India can do together to boost trade ties going forward?
I think very soon. We're doing very well, and Bob Lighthizer, who's right here, was negotiating with India, and they're very capable representatives. And I think very soon we'll have a trade deal. We'll have the larger deal down the road a little bit, but we will have a trade deal very soon.
Mr. President,
you've been talking about, clamping down on terrorism from across the globe. Pakistan has been the global epicenter of terrorism, sir. You've spoke about it in Houston. How do you make sure that you clamp down on terrorism from Pakistan? Because that is posing threat to democracies like the U.S. and India. Even the business interests suffer because of continuing terrorism.
Well, I had a very good meeting with Prime Minister Khan. It was a long meeting, and we discussed a lot. And I think he'd like to see something happen that would be very fruitful, very peaceful. And I think that will happen ultimately. I really believe that these two great gentlemen will get together and work something. I also, you mentioned Pakistan, but Iran would have to be at the top of the list, because if you look at terrorist states, that's been the number one for a long time.
All right, Siddhant Sibal is now joining us live from New York for the very latest on that bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Modi and the U.S. President Donald Trump. And Siddhant, let me begin first with the major highlight there of Donald Trump saying that there will be a trade deal very soon, and all the other points that he highlighted.
Well, clearly two important things that stand out in this bilateral we just got over just 5 minutes ago was on the issue of trade and other on the issue of terrorism. That was the key focus. On the issue of terrorism, the U.S. President clearly said that the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has sent out a loud and clear message to Islamabad. That's a strong statement coming from U.S. President. He also talked about trade. He said that something is being discussed, something can be expected. In fact, when the Indian media delegation was entering into the bilateral room, we saw Piyush Goyal, the Indian Trade Minister, also entering, and in fact he was present in the room, sitting along with the Indian External Affairs Minister. So clearly we can expect some announcement at the end of this bilateral, because the press conference, the presser which we saw is the start of the bilateral, and now the bilateral has started. We will see another briefing by the Foreign Secretary of India later as the day progresses, in which he will be talking about other key issues India has been talking about. But a lot of one-liners coming from the U.S. President. He's saying that the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is the Elvis of India. He's saying that he is the father of the country. Usual one-liners, but pretty much making the headlines very soon in India. But terror was something that was being asked, and of course the U.S. President also talking about it. In fact, the Indian Prime Minister discussed and highlighted the convergences between India and US. He talked about the Houston event, which took place just 2 days ago on Sunday, and talked about how there are convergences between India and United States about how in US President Donald Trump, India finds a friend, a partner, and an ally.
All right, Siddhant, thanks very much indeed for joining us with the latest there. Siddhant Sibal reporting there from New York. Also joining us live now is our executive editor, Palki Sharma Upadhyay, who's live with us from New York. And Palki, what are your major takeaways from this bilateral meeting? Some very flattering words for Prime Minister Modi as well. Palki, I'm sorry, I'm just going to come back to you in a second. I believe the Prime Minister is speaking.
So, हमारे पैट्रोनेट ने वहाँ पर $2.5 बिलियन के इन्वेस्टमेंट के साथ एनर्जी सेक्टर में इन्वेस्टमेंट का एमओयू किया है, और उसका परिणाम ये होगा कि आने वाले कुछ दशक में करीब $60 बिलियन का ट्रेड और करीब 50,000 लोगों के लिए जॉब। तो अपने आप में एक बहुत बड़ा इनिशिएटिव भारत ने लिया है। राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप मेरे तो मित्र है ही है, लेकिन भारत के बहुत एक अच्छे मित्र के रूप में आज भारत और अमेरिका बहुत तेजी से आगे बढ़ रहे हैं, और मैं राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप का फिर से एक बार धन्यवाद करता हूं।
First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to President Trump that he was with me in Houston day before yesterday. He took out time from his busy schedule to go to Houston, and he spent a lot of time with us. And I think for the Indian community, people of Indian origin.
All right, let's go back to Palki Sharma Upadhyay, who is in New York and joining us live. And Palki, back to my question about, flattering comments both for Prime Minister Modi and, of course, for Imran Khan a day earlier. But the important bits coming out of this, of course, is that both sides said that there will be a trade deal in the days to come.
That is the most significant aspect of it. The outlines and the specifics of what this trade deal is going to entail is something that we're waiting to see, Bhairavi. But trust Donald Trump to muddle some very serious issues with catchy one-liners. He said this for Imran Khan, that he's a friend of Pakistan, and then he said it for India, and he hasn't been very fond of history in the past, if you go by his statement, so he's called the Indian Prime Minister the father of India. Ironic at a time when the Indian government is celebrating the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, for the U.S. President to make such a statement. Flattering indeed, but it also shows perhaps a lack of disregard for history of India and for his guest. He's compared him to the Elvis of India, which is understandable, because Narendra Modi received a rock star reception in Houston, and that is unmatched and unparalleled in U.S. history for a foreign leader, apart from the Pope, as we understand from the comparisons we've made before. But the fact is that this was supposed to be a very serious meeting. For the U.S. President to say that I'm sure they can handle, that India can handle terrorism emanating from Pakistan, in the same breath almost as he says that I shall be happy to mediate. This is either part of a plan to play both sides, or complete lack of understanding on the part of the American president on the sensitivities in the subcontinent. He meets Imran Khan one day, he says something. He meets Prime Minister Modi, he says something else. Tries to keep everyone happy, but doesn't move an inch when it comes to the issues that really matter, i.e. trade and terrorism.
Absolutely, Palki, and important points there being highlighted by you. And also, of course, to one specific question, I believe, from an Indian reporter who said that what about the epicenter of terror coming from Pakistan? He actually said that, well, the list will have to be topped by Iran. So you're right to say that he's been hoodwinking, he's been giving mixed signals about what his position really is on Kashmir and India and Pakistan as well.
Right, and this is something that the U.S. President has done. So when those statements came from Houston, his praise for Narendra Modi, he was clearly taken by surprise at the kind of reception that the Indian Prime Minister received. If you look at the papers in New York, we saw the New York Times yesterday running a half-page story on the Houston event, and they said that this was Narendra Modi's event, the Indian Prime Minister's event, and the U.S. President at best received polite applause there. The Wall Street Journal also went on to say that this was he was a guest at this event, and this was all about the Indian Prime Minister. So Donald Trump went to Houston and said what he said, and now that he's in New York, he's meeting different world leaders, and we've seen this in the past. He's been very critical of China, but then he lands in China and he meets the Chinese president, and he heaps praises on him. He calls the North Korean leader a rocket man, and then he meets him and then he says that he's a great guy and I'm very fond of him. So the American press has been telling us that you take everything that comes from the White House with a pinch of salt, but a good day, it'll make good headlines, whatever President Trump has said about Narendra Modi, and I'm sure the Indian delegation is happy that it's ending with all positive messaging, but the devil lies in the details, so we'll have to see what this trade deal has and what does it have for India at a time when the global economy is under so much pressure, and India is looking at fixing things, some game-changing measures announced by the government in Delhi. How do America's measures and moves impact trade with India is something that we're worth looking at.
Absolutely, Palki. Thanks very much indeed for joining us with the latest there. And of course, big headlines there coming out once again from Donald Trump's statements, always making the right headlines there globally. Well, also joining us on the show tonight is Dr. Anish Goel, Senior Fellow in the International Security Program at the New America, who is live with us from Washington, D.C. And also Atman Trivedi, Managing Director at Hills & Company, is live with us from Washington as well. And Dr. Anish, if I can come to you first, your comments and your thoughts of those closing statements by Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the U.S. President Donald Trump, where essentially they talked about the fact that there will be much to announce on the trade deal, but also Donald Trump calling India a great friend of America, and vice versa.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for having me on the show. And, the warm personal comments between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump are not surprising in any way. I think both leaders operate through personal chemistry. And this was on full display in what we just saw, not only today, but what we saw in Houston on Sunday. And so I think that this was what was expected. Regarding the trade negotiations, this was also expected. The White House had been signaling for several weeks now that a trade deal was probably coming very soon. But we have to see what exactly is in this trade agreement. Does it just take us back to the status quo that was in place before President Trump came to office, or does it solve a lot of the issues that have vexed the relationship for a long time? And that's what we don't know yet. So I think everyone who's watching this relationship is very eager to see what exactly is in this trade deal.
Right, absolutely. The devil will certainly be in the detail, and that's exactly going to be the point. Mr. Trivedi, your thoughts then about how these details will have to pan out. It's all good to say good things about each other, but then obviously the Americans have to walk the talk. The Prime Minister has announced that there will be deals worth $60 billion in the coming years, and of course which will generate 50,000 in terms of jobs as well, 50,000 jobs or more.
It'll be interesting to see, as you say, if the words are matched with action. And I think we're left with a bit of a cliffhanger as the two leaders try to reach a meeting of the minds. It looks like there will be a mini deal potentially on trade issues. The deal could cover long-standing American concerns related to certain agriculture products, not all of them, but some of them, price controls on medical devices, and possibly some reduction in recent Indian tariff hikes. On the Indian side, the Indians will be hoping that Trump restores developing nation trade benefits that were removed from India in May. And so both countries have a good amount riding on the issue. I think a more interesting question is what comes out of the meeting. We heard from President Trump that any deal is likely to be a small one, if you will, and that there will be a larger, more comprehensive one down the road. And so does the positive momentum lead to progress towards a deal that down the road that includes services like the digital economy, e-commerce, and intellectual property.
Right.
And that remains to be seen.
Yes, and we know Donald Trump's, sort of obsession with trade, because at the UNGA, his own speech, a large part of it, of course, was about trade and trade imbalances, particularly with China. But going back to the point specifically about Pakistan, we had, a bilateral between the U.S. President and Imran Khan yesterday. We had a bilateral between Prime Minister Modi and Donald Trump today. And in terms of optics, how do you read it, Mr. Trivedi? And come back to Mr. Goel later.
I think both leaders specialize in optics. They've mastered the art of political theatricality and are very comfortable and indeed thrive in the limelight. On Pakistan, I think we're seeing why, from the U.S. side, President Trump's predecessors have chosen not to embroil themselves in the issue. I wouldn't read too much from press questions with specific agendas or occasional tweets that suggest a lack of an agenda in trying to interpret U.S. policy on the issue. I think with both leaders there, Prime Minister Khan as well as Prime Minister Modi, it's not surprising that there's been some back and forth on the issue. But I think at day's end, there could be less than meets the eye on Pakistan and some of the issues in dispute.
Okay. Dr. Goel, then your thoughts about some of the statements he made yesterday about the Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan, saying no other president in the past has treated, the Pakistan leadership well, and also referring to some sort of aggression from the Indian side. We don't exactly know what he was talking about. So there are mixed signals coming from Donald Trump when it comes specifically to India and Pakistan, of course, pointedly, however, repeating that he would only mediate in Kashmir if both parties were on board.
So the comments about Kashmir and mediation are actually longstanding U.S. policy that the United States would be willing to mediate, but only if both countries were to request it. And so President Trump has actually reaffirmed what has been longstanding policy. Now, I think that, though, we should be careful about expectations getting wildly out of whack. Just because the president offered to mediate, I think that we all know that that's not going to happen. And the Indians don't want mediation. In fact, the Indian government probably doesn't even want to open talks with Pakistan right now until we see sort of a decline in terrorist activities. And so these are thorny issues, and these are very complicated. And I think the statements from the last couple of days maybe gloss over some of the complexity of these issues.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Trivedi, then, the fact remains that the Americans need the Pakistanis in Afghanistan, which is why there is this leverage that the Pakistan leadership has, and that's not going to go away anytime soon. The Indians just have to seem to accept that and move on from that, the fact that we have our own issues to deal with when it comes to America, and the Pakistanis are going to be very, very much a part of this narrative.
I only caught the last part of what you said because we have a poor connection, but
right.
It certainly remains the case that Pakistan is critical to any resolution of the Afghan issue. The president has been clear, dating back from his campaign, that he would like a tidy withdrawal and a downsizing of the U.S. commitment in Pakistan. Recent negotiations with the Taliban have, of course, hit a snag. But Pakistan remains largely central finding a political solution to a war that has spanned almost 2 decades for the United States.
Right. All right, Dr. Anish Goel and Atman Trivedi, thank you both very much indeed for joining us and sharing your thoughts today on that bilateral meeting between the U.S. President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Modi, and of course looking ahead now to the Prime Minister's speech at the UNGA. Thanks both. Well, we're stepping into a short break at this point. A lot more on the other side when we come back.